order. Welcome to meeting number 3 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 1064, this meeting, sorry, no, that was the last meeting. So we are on meeting number 3. That's why there was that error as well. And I'd like to start the meeting by providing you some of the following information. The committee is now sitting, especially for the new members, it's sitting in hybrid format. And so you can participate in person or by video conference, and the witnesses must appear. The witnesses must always appear by video conference. All members, regardless of their method of participation, will be counted for the purposes of quorum. The committee's power to sit is, however, limited by the priority use of House resources, which is determined by the whip. All questions must be decided by a recorded vote unless the committee disposes of them with the unanimous consent or on division. And finally, the committee may deliberate in camera, provided that it takes into account the potential risks to confidentiality inherent to such deliberations with remote participants. Today's meeting will be made available via the House of Commons website. A reminder that the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. And to ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules for everyone to follow. For those participating virtually, members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice of English or French or floor at the bottom of your screen. Before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. When you are done speaking, please put your mic on mute to minimize any interference. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. And if members wish to intervene on a point of order that has already been raised by another member, they should use the raised hand function. This will signal to the chair your interest to speak and create a speakers list. In order to do so, you should click on the participant section at the bottom of your screen and click on the raised hand function. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. Unless there are exceptional circumstances, the use of headsets with a boom microphone is mandatory for everyone participating remotely. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise the chair. Please note that we may need to suspend for a few minutes as we resolve those technical difficulties to ensure that members are able to participate fully. For those participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Should you wish to get my attention, signal to me with a hand gesture or at an appropriate time, call out my name. Should you wish to raise a point of order, wait for an appropriate time and indicate to me clearly that you wish to raise a point of order. With regard to the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain a consolidated order of speakers for all members, whether they are participating virtually or remotely. Today, I'd like to start off by welcoming a new member to our team. So we've got Mr. Daniel Blakey, who will be joining us, I believe, permanently, and will be replacing Miss Blaney, of course, who will be missed as well. And I had a conversation with her yesterday, and she said that she would be missing being on this committee as well. So maybe at a future time we may have her back, but time will tell, I guess, on that. And other than that, I did want to give a moment because our committee meetings really started off. We were very busy in the first couple of meetings, I guess I'll put it that way, and weren't able to do proper introductions of our wonderful clerk and our analyst. And we have a new analyst that has joined the team. So I was hoping that they could maybe perhaps introduce themselves to the members properly. And I apologize not being able to take the time to do that in the last meeting because, well, you know, we really had to get into business at the last meeting. So, and I guess we will start with Mr. Justin Babe, if you can introduce yourself to the committee and then have the analyst do so as well.
Oh, hello, everyone. I'm Justin Vave, the clerk of the committee. I've been the clerk of the PROC committee since the beginning of this parliament, so now into my second session with the PROC committee. Thanks.
I guess I could jump in. It's Andre Barnes. I work for the Library of Parliament, and I've been on PROC since 2010. Looking forward to this new session.
Yeah, a lot of experience.
Excellent. Point of order.
Yes,
It's Karen.
yes, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Ruby. I just wanted to check. I know that I've been sitting on a few other committees, and just one of the concerns that I have is on the speaking list. And I know that it's very difficult. We're doing a hybrid style, so seeing what's happening in the room versus what's happening on the screens. And I was just wondering what the mode will be when it comes to making sure that the speakers list, who's going to be drawing together that speakers list and forward from that. I've just seen that from other committees that there's been a few issues, and I just want to address that to see how we'll be proceeding with the speakers list.
Okay, so at the beginning of the meeting, I did mention that the clerk and I will be maintaining a consolidated list. So that will include, we're going to monitor as the hands, and I have my screen open to see how the hands go up virtually in the order that those that speak in the room. And of course, just like you raised the point of order, you can always unmute your mic and raise a point of order. The clerk and I are in constant communication throughout the meeting. So we have a method to communicate through. And if he sees that I may have missed somebody or somebody else, is to be sandwiched into the order, then he lets me know immediately. And I follow the advice of the clerk for that order.
Thank you very much. I just wanted it on exactly.
Okay. All right, and if we can continue with the introductions of our new member to the analyst team.
Donc, bonjour, Laurence Bossot. Je travaille à la Bibliothèque du Parlement depuis maintenant 3 ans.
I've been working at the Library of Parliament for some 3 years. I am delighted to be a member of this team. Thank you.
Your name?
Laurence Bossot.
Thank you so much for being a part of this team. And I know that everyone is, perhaps they've seen you work on other committees, but we're really pleased to have you aboard in our committee and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to committee business, we have a few motions that have been given notice to this committee. The order of those motions right now are Ms. Pettipat-Taylor's motion. We have 3 motions on notice, and then one that has just been put on notice this morning. The 3 on notice, the one from Ms. Pettipat-Taylor, and then there's 2 from Ms. Blaney. Ms. Blaney's motions at this point, since she is no longer a member of this committee, they're going to be considered null and void at this time. And I wanted to mention, though, that one of her motions talked about a study of election readiness and or an election during the pandemic. And I did have an opportunity to speak with the Chief Electoral Officer last week in reference to the report that Elections Canada has submitted to the House of Commons, entitled Special Report of the Chief Electoral Officer Administrating an Election During the COVID-19 Pandemic. This report has been circulated to all the members of the committee. Essentially, it's a 27-page report, at least in the English version, and essentially it asks for it makes 3 different recommendations. And in my conversation with the Chief Electoral Officer, he's extremely eager to want to come before this committee to give us his thoughts on the report, to allow us to ask him any questions that we may have regarding the report or regarding elections in the future. And the reason he is so eager is well, we're in a minority government situation, and I guess I don't need to really explain that. They need to prepare, and they need to prepare oftentimes a lot sooner than we would think. They need to start getting the wheels in motion, and so allowing him to have some insight into what our thoughts may be on this committee would really help form their perspective as to direction. And so he's really ready to come in, and regardless of what study we move forward with or the committee decides today, um, it's oftentimes very difficult to get witnesses in on a last minute notice. And so I wanted to let you know that he is willing to come in Thursday if we were to move on um, a study related to that. But right now, as it is, um, we do have Madame Petitpat Taylor's motion on the floor, and then I do see that we've got some hands up. So I guess I'll put it out to you as to what direction the committee would like to move in. Mr. Turnbull's hand is up, and then Mr. Blakey's hands up.
I put a notice of motion in just before the meeting. Worked on it late last night. It borrows a little bit from Rachel Blaney's motion that would be null and void now that, and welcome Daniel Blakey, glad to have you. So it's slightly adjusted the wording, but I'd like to read it into the record and then maybe give a short synopsis of why I think this should be the priority for this committee, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So here's the motion. It was sent around, I think Justin distributed about 30 minutes before the meeting, roughly speaking. So I'll just read the English. My French is horrible. My apologies. So I'll read it in English. That the procedure
Point of order. Point of order,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Point of order. Who is it? Mr. Doherty?
Yes. I just have a question, and I apologize to Mr. Turnbull. But before he gets into his motion, I just want clarification on the comment regarding Ms. Blaney's motion being null and void. It is my understanding that once a motion has been tabled, regardless of the person on the committee or not, it is the committee's business, and it's the committee's to do with whatever they so choose. So another member, an existing member of the committee that is still on the committee, can then choose to, or the committee itself could then vote and say, yes, we still want, we've got those three motions or that motion that is here, although that member is no longer part of this. If it is the committee's will, then they can still choose to adopt that motion. It doesn't just arbitrarily become null and void, and I believe it is the committee's business to be able to do that. And so through you, Madam Chair, I was wondering if we could get clarification from the clerk procedurally.
Yeah, I seeked clarification before this meeting, and maybe I should give a more fulsome explanation.
Sure.
My apologies for that. Okay, so since the motion that was adopted in the House changed the PROC membership by replacing Ms. Blaney with Mr. Blakey, the notices of motion standing in Ms. Blaney's name are null and void. But should another member wish to have her motions considered, new notice would have to be given unless the committee is prepared to waive the notice requirement. And I think Mr. Blakey is next up to speak as well. And I'm assuming, I guess, that there'd be some interest in reviving the subject matter of Ms. Blaney's motion and looking at that. And of course, any other committee members are free to do that as well. Mr. Clerk.
Madam Chair, for the benefit of the members, I just underscore a distinction between motions that have been moved, and then, as Mr. Doherty rightfully states, they are then the property of the committee. They can be consideration of those can be continued and then ultimately voted upon. In the case of the two notices of motion that were received from Ms. Blaney, they were only notices of motions per se. They hadn't yet been moved. And there is something in the House Commons procedure and practice at page 1062, which states notices of motion issued by a member who is no longer a member of a committee become moot. So in this case, if there is someone on the committee that would like to reoffer those notices of motion from Ms. Blaney, they can do so. And just as the chair has indicated, they would then go through a period, a 48-hour notice period, just as any substantive motion would, unless obviously there was agreement by the committee, unanimous consent of the committee to proceed with them immediately. So it's in the hands of the committee.
So on that same point of order, if I may, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
And this is partly, if you guys will forgive me, as the new member of the committee, who's not exactly familiar with all the routine motions that would have just passed recently. I know on other committees, the notice requirement stands unless there's a substantive motion that pertains directly to the business before the committee. In this case, if we're discussing committee business, it seems to me that unless that rule doesn't apply, that it would be in order for anyone member of the committee to remove the motion that Ms. Blaney had presented to the committee, simply because we're discussing committee business at this time. So I don't, unless there's something I don't know about PROC, it seems to me that it would be perfectly in order just to move the motion that Ms. Blaney had presented, given that it relates to the business before the committee.
Yes, Mr. Blakey, in committee business today, you can definitely do that. And that's why I just mentioned that. I'm assuming that you'll probably be doing that on your turn. And it's appropriate to do so since we're trying to figure out, I guess, at this point in today's meeting, which direction we should be heading in as a committee and what issues we should be exploring. So back to Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for that clarification. And essentially, I would say I am moving Ms. Blaney's motion with a few changes to it. That one notably would be the timeline, which I believe needs to be a bit shorter because this is such a high priority. So let me read it. That the Procedure and House Affairs Committee conduct a study of the challenges posed to the normal conduct of federal elections by the COVID-19 pandemic and identify the measures to be taken to adapt the approach and conduct of a general election to preserve the health and safety of all Canadians. This study should begin with the top priority on a review of the recommendations made by Canada's Chief Electoral Officer in the special report of the Chief.
Sorry, I know you keep getting interrupted, Mr. Turnbull, but there's a lot of static coming out of your mic, and I'm just concerned that the translators might be having a difficult time because of that static. I know in the past, maybe unplugging your microphone and replugging it back in has helped. Could you give that a try? Okay, let's see if that's done the trick. Go ahead. Oh, sometimes it does the opposite and it's put you on mute. We can't hear you, Mr. Turnbull.
Okay, Mr. Turnbull. Sorry.
There we go. Coming through.
Mr. Turnbull, they're telling me here in the room that you should select the channel.
I'm on English.
Oh, okay. If you select at the bottom, there should be a little arrow where it says mute. His device. Yeah, you need to select your microphone, your headset, and it's called a Plantronics. It's called Plantronics.
Mm-hmm. It does say that it's selected. So
okay.
But I can click on it again. It said it was selected already.
Okay, if you can just speak for a few seconds and we'll see if it gets better or
Sure.
if we might need to look into it further.
Sure, I can do that. Really glad to be here with everybody and looking forward to talking about this motion and how we can make sure an election, whenever it happens, is
Mr. Turnbull, it still is problematic. So we'll have an IT ambassador reach out to you, and we'll try to he'll try to help you figure out what the problem is.
Could we suspend for the moment until I get this sorted out?
Yeah, I was just about to suggest that. So let's suspend just for a
My
few moments.
apologies, everyone.
Point of
I've
order.
never had any problems with my headset before.
Point of order.
Yeah.
Why would we suspend when we have another member that is waiting to bring forth or talk about a motion? Why would we just suspend at this point?
I'll answer that point of order if I could, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I guess I can give my opinion at the end. Go ahead.
It's been normal practice in this committee, absolutely, that when any member drops out, that we suspend until every member can be present. Just because Mr. Turnbull.
All right. Fair enough. Thanks, Mark.
I was just going to say, when someone has the floor, I need to allow them to finish making their complete thought before I move on to the next person. And so if a person isn't, like I stated at the beginning, fully able to participate, then we allow, and I would do the same for you as well. If you had the floor, I'd allow you to get the help that needed. And hopefully it only takes a few moments. we know that I guess these things happen from time to time. Yeah, without further delay, let's get back to Mr. Turnbull so we can get somewhere today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and sorry, committee members, for the technical difficulties. It was really beyond my control. I think I had just worked too many hours, and the surface was overheating. That's what IT said. It was just too many things were open. So my apologies for that. I will pick up generally where I left off. I can't remember exactly, so I'll start from that one of the last sentences that I remember. Or would you like me to start from the beginning? What makes the most sense?
Yeah, beginning is what I'm seeing signals for.
Okay. All right. So that the Procedure and House Affairs Committee conduct a study of the challenges posed to the normal conduct of federal elections by the COVID-19 pandemic and identify the measures to be taken to adapt the approach and conduct of a general election to preserve the health and safety of all Canadians. This study should begin with the top priority on a review of the recommendations made by Canada's Chief Electoral Officer in the special report of the Chief Electoral Officer administering an election during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the name of the report that the chair was referring to earlier. And shall proceed to studying additional and related challenges. The committee should hear from witnesses, including but not limited to 1. Canada's Chief Electoral Officer, 2. Provincial Chief Electoral Officers who have already run elections during the pandemic, 3. Public health officials, 4. Advocates for those who face barriers to voting, and C. That the committee report its findings to the House no later than November 16th, 2020.
Okay. Do you wish to speak to this motion? How is it different? I guess it's very minor differences from Ms. Blaney's motion. I have them out in front of me. I didn't get a chance to look at your motion really ahead of time.
Yeah, I think it's not substantively different than Rachel Blaney's original motion. It does shorten the timeline slightly, and it prioritizes the recommendations in the report, some of which suggest that some legislative change may be required. I read the report last night from the Chief Electoral Officer on administering an election during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are 3, I think, important recommendations thus far that have come out of the working group that they've formed. And I have a bit of a summary of those, but essentially it's extending the election or the voting period. It's looking at how voting in long-term care facilities can be better managed to preserve the health and safety of our seniors and those individuals working in those facilities, and adjusting the adaptation power that the Chief Electoral Officer has to adapt procedures during an emergency situation like we find ourselves in today. So I think those are high level, and these seem to be pressing concerns with, the thought that an election could be approaching at any time. We don't know when. It's a minority parliament, and my understanding is that it is PROC's duty to review these reports that are produced by the Chief Electoral Officer. And it seems that given the unknown of an election, that we probably should tighten the timelines slightly. The other thing that the motion did was take out some of the very specific topics that were included in Rachel Blaney's original motion. That's not to say that we shouldn't study those. I just wanted to keep it general because I think there's considerable number of other topics that we may want to cover. So I figured the motion would be easier, hopefully, to get through this committee and get support for it if we took out some of those specific topics and left it open for us for further discussion on how we undertake that study as a committee. There are many topics, obviously, you know, that we can look at. I know that you know, the pandemic circumstances are impacting a lot of, you know, voting, you know, polling locations being at predominantly at public schools, or you know, those locations are really, you know, we're going to have to think a lot about how an election happens where we don't have those locations potentially to use. Um, Mechanisms to keep voters and poll workers safe. So obviously social distancing within those locations is going to change the operation of them. I saw statistics that voting by mail and the capacity to do that is also an issue that's being flagged for further study and discussion. And I think evaluating possible changes to the Canada Elections Act, which I think we should be staying neutral at a time like this until like those recommendations are being made to us as a committee, but we need a fulsome discussion and study on those recommendations to either, you know, sort of endorse them or not. And in some cases, we may want to recommend something slightly different than what's been proposed. So, and I think that that's our duty. And I think all of this is couched within, you know, what I see as the most, you know, essential process for our democracy is that people can exercise their right to vote and do so safely within a pandemic. And we're all committed here. I know as PROC members and members of parliament, we want to keep Canadians healthy and safe above all else. And so I really think that we need to have a tightened time frame on this for at least, you know, a portion of the study perhaps. And I think that this is work that is high priority given the current circumstances and a minority parliament. So I'll stop there for now, but those are some of the rationale for, you know, why I think this should be the top priority for us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. We have a speakers list going, Mr. Blakey, Ms. Becchio, and then Mr. Doherty. I did want to just give like a little bit of feedback to what you had said. When I spoke to the Chief Electoral Officer, I did mention that there is a motion on notice wanting to look at the study of the election and through this pandemic, and he did, I guess, and I'm sure if he comes to our committee soon, then he'll let us know in person as well. But he did urge us to try to dispose of the recommendations that they've made, give comments and feedback to that as soon as possible. Even if we were to take on a larger study that has your timeline, Mr. Turnbull, or has another timeline, whatever the committee decides. He was hoping that at least those recommendations could receive feedback from this committee as soon as possible, and even if we were to carry on a lengthier, longer study. So, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. I just want to start by maybe giving a little context to where this motion comes from on the NDP side. In addition to a couple other critic portfolios, I am the NDP's Democratic Reform Critic. And back in June, I wrote to all the parties, the various Democratic Reform critics and a member of the government, sort of expressing concern over what was then on Elections Canada website, which was essentially just a kind of advisory that the pandemic posed a lot of challenges to running an election under the current legal framework for elections. And the website went so far as to say that, you know, Elections Canada has, since its inception, a power to essentially nullify the writ in either particular ridings across the country or entire regions of the country if they don't feel satisfied that they can deliver an election according to the legal requirements of the Elections Act. And I found that quite alarming because it's I mean, whether it's a particular riding or whether it's a set of ridings across the country or entire regions of the country, I think not only would it be unfortunate if Canadians in those areas weren't able to avail themselves of the opportunity of an election to decide who they want to have represent them, but that could also become politicized very quickly. And certain people at the time, so I'm not saying who it might be, but any political actor might at that point decide that it's in their best political interest to attack the legitimacy of the electoral process rather than to compete within the rules, and that was something that was very important to avoid, whatever your political stripe or orientation is within Canada, because I think we can all agree that we all want to have the rules of engagement at election time be clear, and we want political parties and political actors to be competing for the support of Canadians within an established framework rather than trying to get political advantage by attacking the legitimacy of the framework itself. I found that quite alarming. I wrote the parties, unfortunately didn't hear back over the summer, and so that's where because that letter included an invitation to begin discussions about how we might begin considering some of these questions and coming to agreement on the best path forward. So in the absence of hearing back on that letter, our next step was to try and bring it in a more formal way to a committee of the House, PROC obviously being the committee of the House that would go to, in order to try and get some action on the file. So that's where Ms. Blaney's motion came from, was out of that letter, and then seeking some kind of way to move forward in this parliamentary session. So that's the background. In terms of which motion we proceed with, I'm just going to start by saying that my preference is still for Ms. Blaney's motion, and it's not because I don't want to consider the recommendations of the chief electoral officer. I think that's important, and I think that should be an urgent matter of business within the framework of that study. I do think that while Ms. Blaney's motion does raise some particular issues that are worth studying, it's very clear that the study would include those items but not be limited to those items. So I think we have the latitude that we need in order to be able to pursue a detailed study right off the hop of the chief electoral officer's recommendations. One of the things that issues of concern, and it's not because I think it's on purpose, but one of the things that I note about the shorter termination date for the study in Mr. Turnbull's motion is that while with Ms. Blaney's motion, we would have the flexibility to issue an interim report that might address exclusively the content of the chief electoral officer's recommendations, Mr. Turnbull's motion would effectively end the entire study that early. And I'm not sure that, when we look at the sitting calendar in terms of the days remaining, I'm not sure that there's enough in order to do justice to the subject matter, particularly not if we consider Ms. Blaney's motion for a moment. I mean, some of the things that are in there go above and beyond, and I think part of the role that PROC can play here is to go above and beyond the content of what Elections Canada was doing. Now, Elections Canada was doing its job, and I have confidence in Elections Canada to do it well. But Elections Canada doesn't provide advice to political actors on how to campaign, for instance. That's something that we all do. That's something that we all know how to do. We might do it in slightly different ways. But I think for us to be able to have a discussion not only with non-partisan officials, but also between us as partisan political actors about how we campaign and what kinds of campaigning practices might be acceptable in the context of a pandemic, and which normal campaigning practices we might all agree it's important, or that PROC might recommend that we suspend or that we alter in order to make sure that we're not trespassing on public health measures is also very important. So I do think that the original motion that was on notice with the committee provides a little more latitude in terms of timing without making the object of Mr. Turnbull's motion impossible. I think it rightly names, for the sake of transparency for Canadians who will be following this. Some of the particular items that PROC can provide a bit of value added, if you will, to what Elections Canada is doing by considering some of the more partisan elements of campaigning and elections during a pandemic. And it gives us a little more time to play with, which does not in any way prevent us from reporting out on an interim basis on items like the recommendations of the Chief Electoral Officer that we might consider to be more urgent. And I'll just maybe put on the record just a little bit of puzzlement, and I look forward maybe to some clarification from the Chief Electoral Officer when he has occasion to come to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee just on the urgency to hear from PROC on his recommendations. And it's not because I don't agree that we need to move quickly on this. I absolutely do. I would have preferred if we'd been able to get a start on it in the summer, frankly. But all three of his recommendation areas involve legislative changes. And of course, those aren't going to happen by recommendation from PROC. They're going to happen when the government introduces legislation. And I presume that once that legislation passes second reading, if it does in the House of Commons, that it will come to PROC. And at that moment, PROC will be seized with the question of what we really need to discuss, which is the government's legislative response to the Chief Electoral Officer's recommendation. So it's not that I think it's premature for PROC to be considering those things, but I wonder at the urgency of PROC needing to report out on those things before we have a sense of what the government is going to do and what kind of legislation that they'll be drafting to meet what they see as being the legislative commitments that come out of those recommendations. So we actually do have a little more time and wiggle room. It would be different if the government had already tabled legislation, but I do think PROC is going to have not only this opportunity, but also the opportunity that study after second reading would afford in order to consider those recommendations.
May I ask?
And with the benefit of knowing what the government's concrete response to those would be.
May I just interject with a quick question to you without you ceding the floor, Mr. Blakey? I'm just wondering the timeline. I have heard from Mr. Barnes as well, the analyst, that the November 16th would be very difficult. November 23rd, they could make work, but not that I'm suggesting, nor is he really suggesting. He's just saying from a logistical standpoint that they could maybe possibly make that work, but the 16th they cannot. And I'm wondering whether, and I completely understand what you're saying with the legislation, and legislation would be then coming to this committee as well. Would you want to entertain amendments to Mr. Turnbull's motion? I'm just wondering, or did you want to procedurally go through voting eventually? We do have a speakers list, and obviously we won't go to that until everyone has spoken, but I just don't know whether, like, before
Sure.
you see
I mean, what I might suggest in terms of expediency, and of course, I'm not prejudging the reactions of any member of the committee. My sense is that we might find agreement more quickly if we were to seek unanimous consent to dispense with Mr. Turnbull's motion and move Ms. Blaney's motion and consider it adopted. And then within that, we could begin talking about the parameters of the study, including hearing the Chief Elections Officer on Thursday and trying to get up and going as quickly as possible to be able to issue an interim report if we see fit after hearing from the CEO of Elections Canada on a more expedited basis that speaks directly to his recommendations. That's just my sense of how we might find agreement more quickly and use this meeting time to flesh out what the study looks like. But that's certainly something that I believe would require unanimous consent, not simply a vote.
Yeah.
So I would put that to the committee, Madam Chair, if that's all right with you. If we could get unanimous consent for that, if we can't, then we can begin figuring out how we dispense with the various motions before us.
Yep, absolutely. So the speakers list, we've got next Ms.
Point of order.
Mr. Doherty, and then Ms. Duncan, Dr. Duncan.
Point of order.
So maybe we'll move in that order and see what they have to say. Yes, Mr. Doherty.
Madam Chair, just before Mr. Blakey cedes the floor, I just have a question for him. At the very beginning, he talked about Elections Canada and the legitimacy of the writ in certain electoral districts if they feel that they can't. My understanding was what he was saying was that they feel they can't conduct an election safely, that they can suspend the writ or make the writ null and void in certain electoral districts. Did I hear that correctly? And so before he cedes the floor, I just wanted to ask that question, and maybe perhaps give him an opportunity to explain that a little bit further.
Sure.
I mean, I guess that's a friendly question, and if Mr. Blakey would like to shed some more light on that, but I'm sure we could also ask the chief electoral officer eventually when he's before the committee as well, because that is interesting.
And the answer is yes, you did absolutely hear that right, and that's published on. I haven't checked the website recently, but certainly in June that was published on the Elections Canada website. If you go to their main site and then click on their COVID-19 tab and read what they have there, they do draw attention to that power. And I mean, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think of what would happen if the election results were substantially similar to the election results that we saw in the last election, but in 30 ridings across the country, you had Elections Canada saying, we just can't meet the administrative requirements of the election. Then you would have a situation where some party may be asked to form a government based on an incomplete House of Commons, and the way that those seats would have landed or will ultimately land by the time whatever wave we're in passes and Elections Canada is able to hold that election could substantially change the balance of power in the House of Commons and which party could enjoy the confidence of the House of Commons in order to govern. So I mean, this is not an academic question, and I think we can all imagine the worst case scenario in terms of how belligerent certain political actors may be on that point, and may rightly be, because it seems to me that this would be a scenario where it's not just a case of blind partisanship. Depending on the scenario, there could be real legitimate concerns about whether you could really ask a party to form a government if there's an extant 30 seats that we don't know how they're going to land. That could be the difference between having party A form a minority government or party B have a majority government. And so those are very different scenarios, and you would be depending on, and this is not casting aspersions on Elections Canada at all, but a nonpartisan organization making decisions on an administrative basis would suddenly be determining indirectly very substantive political questions, and I don't think that would be healthy for the country. So that's why I've felt for months now that there is a real sense of urgency. This is something we have to get right, but I think some of those questions go beyond the scope of Elections Canada review. So on the same website, if you go to the same tab, what you'll find is, the task that Elections Canada set for itself, and rightly, was first they looked at, what can we do within the current legislative framework? What kind of amendments or alterations can we make to our processes in order to be able to more successfully run an election given the public health constraints within the current legislation? And then they set themselves the task of saying, what are some quick and dirty legislative amendments that Parliament might be able to make in a hurry in order to just make it possible for us to have a better chance of running these elections? That's different than what I think the committee really ought to be. I mean, that is part of it. I think we need, it's incumbent upon us to try and facilitate Elections Canada quick response as quickly as we can, so that they feel that they can move forward with that. Obviously, there's a role for government in that because they need to present those legislative changes. But beyond that, I think there's then the question of, well, how do you ideally run an election inside of a pandemic, rather than just how do we do a rush job of making it possible? Now, Elections Canada has to do that because Elections Canada is in control of when the next election is. We are. So it's incumbent upon us to figure out how we can do an election safely within a pandemic and to figure out the timing of that. I mean, we could You could go on about this. I frankly think that the House of Commons should do a much better job of codifying the confidence convention. We're seeing some of that play out on the floor of the House of Commons today. There is no reason why the confidence convention has to be so opaque and open to interpretation. In Britain, in 2010, they made it very clear in their own standing orders that nothing is a confidence vote unless you have a non-confidence motion. There are two forms that a non-confidence motion can take. They're stipulated in the standing orders. If a motion isn't one of those two motions, it's not a confidence motion. That's a great way not to have a surprise election. And frankly, in the midst of a global pandemic, I think Canada's Parliament should be doing a far better job of making sure we don't have an election by accident. And I think it's kind of shameful that we haven't got it together in order to be able to do that, and that the kinds of games that are happening on the floor of the House today are going on. That's not a separate conversation, but it is a longer conversation than the CEO of Elections Canada is asking us to have. So yes, we want to be able to address his recommendations on an urgent basis, but there's a lot more work for us to do, and there's a lot of things to consider when we talk about elections, not only how you have them, but how they're triggered in the context of a pandemic. I think Ms. Blaney's motion establishes a sufficiently wide scope while pointing out some of the important things that we have to do, and importantly, allows us a little bit more time. So, I mean, if the chair would, I do propose that we test the committee now for unanimous consent to dispense with Mr. Turnbull's motion, lay Ms. Blaney's motion on the table, and see if we can come to some form of quicker agreement on this.
I think we might be able to build consensus. I don't know. It's always good to have consensus whenever we move forward in a united way. I think that's always the ideal way. But there is a speakers list, and I know they've been patiently waiting for some time, and I can see that perhaps there could be frustration if they don't get their say. And so I would like to hear from Ms. Vecchio, Mr. Doherty, and Dr. Duncan, and then hopefully they can maybe shed some light and help us within their remarks as to what their thinking is. Ms. Vecchio.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And to start off with Ryan's, member Turnbull, but Ryan's motion that he put forward today, I see exactly what he's trying to do, and I respect that we do need to have some guidelines specifically for the chief electoral officer, because as Daniel said, we don't want things to go where they could lead to. So I think it's very, very important that we do debate and discuss some of these issues that could come up. As a former chair, and I'm very grateful that Ruby brought it forward, but as a former chair, I am very concerned with that deadline. I do not see that deadline something that would work for this committee, especially when it comes to translation and everything that's going on. As a former committee chair, I can tell you it was delayed quite a bit, and I recognize that I was not the chair of PROC, and I know that there's probably precedence given to this committee on making sure that things are being translated and a variety of things of that sort. But I just do not see how a November 16th timeline could even possibly work. We also have to recognize that during that period of time, although we're doing hybrid sittings, that we are going to be looking at Veterans Week. So we are talking about putting reporting and tabling a report to the House of Commons on November 16th, where we actually only have 18 sitting days between now and then, if you're counting that Veterans Week as a potential sitting week, because of the ability to do hybrid. And I just do not think that we would be able to turn around a fulsome report on what we're really looking at. I would therefore like to move an amendment, and it's specifically to the date. And this is where I would like to move the amendment to change the date to report. Pardon me? What's that? You want me not to? Actually, okay, time out there. I'm gonna pass that back, because I know that Todd does want to speak on this as well. So if I could just roll back on that comment, I will not be moving an amendment at this moment. Everyone okay with this? Okay. So I will not, but I think those are some of the concerns. I have a great concern, and therefore I think it needs to have that additional 3 to 4 weeks to be able to do the work that we need to do. I do not think we're going to be looking at a report where we're going to have unanimous consent on every single issue in there. And so there's going to be not only one draft, but there'll have to be a second draft. There'll have to be translation. And if we're really looking at the inner workings of Parliament, it's just not going to do that bit. So those are concerns that I have there. But when I look at the whole of Turnbull of Ryan's motion, I do see that it is satisfactory in most cases. But I think we also need to get a lot of work done. We know that prorogation, we know that that should be coming up in the next week as well, so that there's many priorities that this committee must study. And so I will now turn over the floor, but thank you very much for my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Vecchio, and I appreciate those comments because I think it gives us a better sense of which direction to head in. Mr. Doherty.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to apologize to my my colleague publicly for calling an audible as well while we're live. I think both motions obviously are very similar in scope. My concern obviously is the timeline of Mr. Turnbull's while bringing forward a motion that is more streamlined. I will give him that, and does focus more on what the Chief Electoral Officer's report is. In his intervention, Mr. Turnbull talks about a fulsome study, and I'm not quite sure that, given the timeline of November 16th, that we would be able to come to a fulsome study as such. So, my concern with Mr. Turnbull's motion would be that the timeline is too short. I know, Ms. Sahota, that you spoke of the urgency in terms of that the Chief Electoral Officer has expressed to you. I think, again, the information and the intervention that Mr. Blakey brought forth, I would be more inclined to support the dispense of Mr. Turnbull's motion and then go with Ms. Blakey's. But perhaps we can come to an amendment, a friendly amendment on timeline, and agree as a committee that we are focusing on the Chief Electoral Officer's recommendations sooner rather than later, and we can do an interim report on what the Chief Electoral Officer's 3 recommendations are. But I see an issue in terms of setting that a definitive timeline for November 16th. I think we need to make sure we hear what the Chief Electoral Officer has to bring forth on Thursday, and decide at that point whether we are going to see ourselves in 4 to 6 meeting study. And then we also know that we've got provincial elections taking place in my province of British Columbia currently, which we moved our date to, or our voting day, or our E-Day, to a weekend. We know Saskatchewan is undertaking theirs in next week. We know that New Brunswick is also we've got the history of New Brunswick's as well too, and I think it would give us a little bit more time, again, not being so rushed, but to really develop that witness list as well too. I think individual groups or parties will have an opportunity to expand the witness list. And again, as we are in unprecedented times, we're not putting undue pressure on our analysts and to quickly turn around a hastily done study just for the sake of expediency, or because we feel that they're, the Chief Electoral Officer is expressing some concern in terms of time. I think it's our duty to make sure that, as Mr. Turnbull said, we are doing our job. I think Canadians, we owe it to Canadians to make sure that we're looking at all areas of this and our concerns. We do not want to put Canadians' health and safety and at risk. And so, Madam Speaker, I appreciate Mr. Turnbull working through the night to put forth this motion. Well-meaning, sir. Yeah, but I think that we've got a motion that's before the House or before the committee in Ms. Blakey. If or Mr. Blaney or Mr. Blakey's side, I think if we can come to some friendly amendments on that, I think that we dispense with Mr. Turnbull's, and then we work to try to right size Ms. Blaney's to something that is more amenable to the committee and get to work on it as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. No, that's helping a lot, and I think what we're hearing is mostly issues with timeline and having a fulsome discussion on this. So, Dr. Duncan, and then Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank all my colleagues for their very thoughtful comments. And I'd like to thank Mr. Turnbull for bringing forward his motion. I am concerned. We are in wave 2. The numbers are clear, and we need to do everything possible to protect Canadians, and particularly our most vulnerable. And I think we have to recognize where we are. We are in a minority government. Confidence votes are going to come up now and again. And I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us that we hear what planning is in place for an election and protecting our democratic institutions. And it's got to be fully functional as we fight this pandemic. I think it's, in the spring, we had to be prepared for whatever the fall brought. If there was a second wave, we have to be prepared now for whatever comes. And I think it's going to be really important to hear what measures Elections Canada are putting in place so that Canadians can express their democratic right. I think what we're hearing from the committee. Perhaps people have talked about timelines. Could we think about an interim report due November 23rd? And the reason I say this is because we are in wave 2. You look at the case numbers, they're hovering around 2,000, 2,200 in the country. Those are really case numbers from 10 to 14 days ago. We don't know where that's going to go. And it is the job of this committee to make sure we are prepared should we have to go into an election, and we do it protecting the health and safety of Canadians. So I would like to suggest that we keep Mr. Turnbull's motion and we add in an amendment to have an interim report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Duncan. Actually, just before this meeting started, I heard that the long-term care home that is right next to my constituency office, we pretty much share a driveway, has had an outbreak. And I know every election we could go in there, and there's a polling that happens in that home, and the candidates are always invited in to speak to the members there too. So it's really unfortunate to hear that news. Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate the discussion and the thoughtful remarks from my colleagues, in particular Ms. Duncan, suggesting that we could build in an interim report deadline. Perhaps amending this motion would enable us to get some consent or unanimous consent on it. I think it sounds to me like we're all amenable to the general idea of studying this as first priority, which is great to hear. Perhaps I was being a little bit overly ambitious, even for our most dedicated House of Commons staff who work around the clock to serve and do an amazing work. So my apologies for that, but I do think that Ms. Duncan makes a really good point that maybe we could have an interim report due on November 23rd, and then leave the study end date perhaps even blank. So just take that out. To Mr. Blakey's point, there may in fact be numerous topics that require significant debate and will take us a little bit longer. And perhaps I was being overly ambitious in thinking that we could do all of this by November 16th. I think that my intention was really to respond to the CEO's request for a swift response, which I think, given some legislative changes that may be necessary, and I get Mr. Blakey's point that some of that may come to us anyway in second reading, but I think having us discuss the recommendations, both non-legislative ones and legislative ones potentially, would be advantageous, and to be able to respond, provide some feedback or guidance within a fairly compressed time frame would be would serve the immediate needs of the chief electoral officer, who's really under the gun. If you think about if I were the person responsible for having to make sure that we can have an election at any time and ensuring that Canadians could exercise their democratic rights safely, I certainly would hope that a parliamentary standing committee would respond to my request for swift guidance. And I think it is our duty as committee members on this committee to respond to that. And I think Mr. Blakey made a really good point. I actually had the quote from the Toronto Star down here that I think quotes the Elections Canada website that, yeah, I mean, essentially the writ could be withdrawn if this is deeply concerning for me. If public health experts thought that Canadians were being put at risk unnecessarily, they could withdraw the writ. And I think that, to me, this has never happened throughout history, as far as I know, and would be a pretty large failure, of our democracy in a way. So, and it's really, I think, our responsibility to step up and respond to this request. And so, I would say, I hope this motion can stand with an amendment. I know I can't amend my own motion, but Ms. Duncan has already suggested, I think, an amendment which might help reach consensus. So, thanks very much.
Okay, so Mr. Clerk, if you could help us, since it's the end of the speakers list, we have a motion on the floor that has been introduced, debated, and amended. Can he not amend himself? And would somebody need to move a formal amendment? And are we then going to vote to see if?
Madam Chair.
How do we move on? Yeah.
I was just going to say that that's right. If there is a need, if the committee does want to have an amendment to Mr. Turnbull's motion, Mr. Turnbull, as the mover, can't move that amendment. It would fall to one of the other members of the committee if they so wish to provide some sort of amendment to it.
So, Dr. Duncan, you have your hand up. If you could provide us with an understanding of what the motion would now be.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to add a friendly amendment. I hope that Mr. Turnbull would accept. As people talked about timelines, I would hope that we could add an interim report by November 23rd. And I'm hoping that might allow for consensus around the table. Thank you very much.
So just the end language would be changed, just the last sentence would be changed, and that the committee that the committee submit an interim report to the House no later than November 23rd.
Exactly.
2020.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, if I might, is there a speakers list?
Mr.
Sorry.
Doherty. There isn't. You'd be the next speaker on the list.
So just to be clear, let's do a walk back in terms of time frame. Interim report due on the 23rd. We would then have to have our again. I'd like to just walk back with the clerk or the analyst in terms of the time frame. If the 18th was really pushing it, how does adding 5 more days make that big of a difference? Would it not be best to push it to the first week of December at the very least? So that then, because again, we are studying, we want to give ourselves some, what do we got, 4 weeks or four meetings, 5 meetings or 6 meetings between now and then to study this. Then we have to agree and meet with the committee again on the text of the interim report. And then it goes to translation. Then we bring it back to the House. I'm just saying, adding an additional, whether it's 5 days or spread it into the first week of December, I think we're probably better.
Okay.
And I think we should go to the clerk or to the analyst to see if there's more time. Needed.
Yeah, Andre. I know from the email you sent me, you said that the 16th would not be possible.
16th.
Did you want to give us some input? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to elaborate, I had sent an email to the chair about the study as set out in Mr. Turnbull's motion, and that the concern that was raised between my colleague and I, Laurence, was that if the chief electoral officer comes November 22nd, then that leaves November 27th and 29th for meetings where we get more testimony. We would then need to consider the report November 3rd.
Andre, I think you mean October 27th and 29th. You said November.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And then we would have, the committee would need to consider the report November 3rd and November 5th. Then it would need to be translated at some point. And there is a break week or a constituency week, November 9th to the 13th, where the House wouldn't sit and this committee probably would not meet. And so the reporting deadline would be hard to meet. In terms of making it a longer study, the library doesn't really have an opinion on that, only to say that the original motion would have been very tight, simply because of translation.
Madam Chair, then could I then suggest that we move to, let's come to an agreement in terms of a friendly amendment and go with the original date that Ms. Blaney suggested of December 11th, and that would give us ample time, because again, as we're discussing, we may have more witnesses and more questions with the electoral officer that would take longer, and then that would give the clerk and analyst more time to actually prepare this report and still be on a timely basis.
And would that, I guess there's a friendly amendment and there's another friendly amendment. Would that date, I think, hold on, I have it in front of me, it's December 11th. Would that be to conclude the full study, or would that be just to report back with an interim report?
Well, I think as we move forward, I would say that would be for the interim report, and the final report could be, as we move forward, we might find that we have moved substantially forward with the information that we need, that we may be able to wrap it up sooner rather than later, as most studies take place. Sometimes you do a study and it's cut and dry, and sometimes you do a study where there's more questions, such as what Mr. Blakey has raised in his intervention. I think if we can, take care of the concern that our analysts have in terms of the timeline, also look at the electoral officer's concerns, and move to take it at least into December. That gives us all enough time to digest what we're going to hear. The committee can debate the information that is being brought forth. We can actually, as Mr. Turnbull used in his intervention, a fulsome a study on the issues affecting, potentially affecting Elections Canada, and conducting an election during COVID. I think we can do a far better job at that's expected of us if we push it a little bit further.
Perfect. Hopefully, I think we're going to get somewhere, and we have about half an hour for the scheduled time. So next we've got Ms. Vecchio on the speakers list, and then Dr. Duncan, and then Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you very much. And I'm just looking at it's a sub amendment basically where Todd's putting a sub amendment to the amendment put forward by Kirsty. And I think we really do have to look at those timeframes. There's a lot that's going to be coming our way. There's lots of reviews that we'll need to be doing and, our job here. So the only question I have, and I understand that, I understand this, but what is going to be the interim report's focus? Is it just on these three things? And then will we be adding additional work to this? That's just I'm just looking at that thinking, what is the interim report versus the final report, looking at those December deadlines? I know it's tight regardless, but I also recognize that if we continue to add to this, saying once we have this interim report, if we just continue to prolong this study, my concern is that we won't get to these other important studies as well. So I just wanted to discuss that a little bit on what we're looking at trying to fulfill.
Yeah, it is my understanding that the interim report would just mainly be focused on the three recommendations from the chief electoral officer, and then the rest of the study, whatever the scope and topics that the parties want to look at and invite witnesses on would be the larger study that would continue. We have Dr. Duncan, and then Mr. Turnbull, and then Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues. I'm concerned. I'm concerned because as a member of this group, we have to be ready for whatever comes. This is a novel virus. We do not know what will happen. I look back to August, the cases across the country were in the low 300s. As I mentioned, they're up around 2,000, 2,200 right now. I think we have to remember that there is a lag time here. So the numbers we're seeing are from 10 to 14 days ago. I think it's important that we keep in mind that asymptomatic spread is still a threat. This is still a virus that hospitalizes people. It still kills people. It's still challenging to treat, and it's still disrupting the world. And I think these outbreaks follow a predictable pattern. People increase their number of contacts, restrictions relax, then weeks later, cases rise, hospitalizations rise, more deaths occur. And we know some provinces are having a harder time than other provinces. I come back to we could see an election just because of we have a minority parliament, a minority government, pardon me, and we have to be ready. And I think the sooner we can get some recommendations, the better. In the spring, we had to be ready for whatever the fall brought. No one knew if there'd be a second wave, if there would be a second wave with flu, but we had to be ready. And I think we have to be ready now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate all the comments, and I'm still working towards consensus here. I think there's maybe some recommendations or some friendly amendments that still can be made. So in an attempt to do that, maybe I'll make a suggestion. I'm hearing, why can't we have two timelines? One for an interim report that really responds to that first report from the chief electoral officer, which we've already received. It's become public. I think we need to respond to those three main recommendations and give some feedback and guidance. Perhaps we could do so if we added language into the middle of the motion that maybe commits to a timeline of December 1st. And that I would suggest would be the latest we should be aiming for in terms of an immediate response to the CEO. And then, my understanding is that there's more reports coming, that the chief electoral officer will in fact be submitting a second report in the future. Is that not true, Madam Chair?
Yes, there will be a report on the 2019 election.
Yeah. So my thinking is that we can continue this study as long as it takes. And I would just note that I have a note here for myself that the last study that was done in the 42nd Parliament that was on the 42nd general election, had 34 meetings spanning October 2016 through June 2017. So obviously, no one here wants to necessarily have that many meetings on reviewing these reports per se, but I would just say, as long as it takes, this committee should be, I believe, digging into the details of how to conduct the safest possible, most efficient possible election. So whenever it comes. So, and I think just so if I could suggest, I know I'm not allowed to move this amendment, but maybe if I suggest it, maybe there's another member of my team that would be willing to sort of move it. I would certainly consider it friendly. In the second
Point of order. I just want a point of order. Right now, I'm just wondering because we've heard sub amendment after sub amendment. If we could just maybe clarify specifically what is being swallowed and what's not. I think that's part of the issue here because we've got all of this going and Ryan, you're doing a great job and I know what you're trying to do, but I know we're just right now we're going back and forth and back and forth. I think let's figure out where are we at this specific moment and what actually is formally put. I mean, it's a friendly amendment versus what are we going to be looking at and what are we trying to amend at this very specific point? Thank you.
So obviously, first we started with the suggestion from Mr. Blakey to withdraw this motion and then move to Ms. Blaney's original motion. We also, I mean, that wasn't an amendment, like that was just if we get through the procedural aspect of voting on this, then that's where I guess we would land, or if Mr. Turnbull was to withdraw. Friendly amendments that were made to Mr. Turnbull's motion. One was by Dr. Duncan, and that was to have an interim report due by November 23rd and then leave the end date of this actual study open. There was a sub-amendment moved by Mr. Doherty to move to the December 11th deadline of the full study. That is my understanding that he said of the complete study. And now we're hearing from Mr. Turnbull as to perhaps another date. I'm not sure. We haven't, I think he's about to say something.
Yeah, point of order, though. I just have to look. I think we have to look at where we're moving forward. I'm looking at Daniel, knowing that he was requesting a UC motion. He had that requested. We're going to go through the speakers list. It had been exhausted. And I just want to go back to the actual procedures of how we should be going through this as a motion is put on the floor, followed by an amendment. And right now we've got all of this fuddle-duddle. And I just want to be...
It was exhausted, and then Mr. Doherty put his hand up to want to move a sub-amendment to the amendment. But otherwise, I was going to move to vote on the amendment that was proposed. But then Mr. Doherty raised his hand, so I decided maybe we shouldn't move to the vote without hearing from Mr. Doherty. He then moved a sub-amendment, and now there's just some debate on that sub-amendment at this moment. Unless you want to, there's a speakers list that has started since that sub-amendment was proposed. That's where we're at.
I just want to look at the family tree of amendments. That's all. Where are we going? And what is the amendment? Yeah,
we're on the sub-amendment that Mr. Doherty has.
So voting on the sub-amendment right now. Okay.
No, we're on a speakers list on the sub-amendment right now. The speakers list is Mr. Turnbull right now, then Mr. Blakey, and there was I believe Miss Petty-Pat-Taylor removed her hand, so it's Dr. Duncan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate Ms. Vecchio's comments. And I realize that it's a bit confusing and there's lots of amendments and sub-amendments being proposed. I certainly am just making an attempt to collaboratively work together and find a timeline that works for everybody. Hearing all those concerns, I'm suggesting that we add an interim report into the middle of the motion, which the line that says this study should begin with the top priority on review of the recommendations made by Canada's chief electoral officer in the special report. And then we could say with an interim report due no later than December 1st. And then it could, continue and shall proceed to studying additional and related challenges. And then we could take out the timeline at the end of the motion, which originally said November 16th. This way, there's no end date specified to the overall study, but there is a commitment to an interim report which responds to the immediate needs of the chief electoral officer, which I think is, just our responsibility as committee members is to meet that ask, that request. Thank you.
Okay. I know it's very confusing, and sometimes with all this formality, we could probably come to a conclusion easier if we just all, had a conversation the normal way people have conversations. But I apologize. Also, the speakers list earlier that I mentioned is next Mr. Blakey, then Mr. Doherty, and then Dr. Duncan. So that is who we still have on the speakers list, and I'm still really optimistic that by the end of the scheduled time, maybe we could have the vote and have some decision made. So, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you. So, I mean, given the discussion, my impression is that there's nothing in the scope of Ms. Blaney's motion that isn't covered by Mr. Turnbull's motion. That the committee has agreement on that. So if we propose to look at any of the elements that were mentioned in Ms. Blaney's motion as part of this study, nobody is going to be citing the terms of reference of Mr. Turnbull's motion as a reason why we wouldn't be looking at things in Ms. Blaney's motion. So, I'm more concerned about getting the study started than I am about belaboring these details. I take the point that we want to get back to the House quickly on the chief electoral officer's recommendations. I still think that we might be making too big a deal of that, frankly, because whatever the chief electoral officer has recommended and whatever our views of that are is going to be superseded by the government's legislation. They're the ones who have to draft the legislation, and our opinions about what legislative changes should be made or whether the chief electoral officer has made good recommendations don't themselves generate any legislative proposals. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the government that's going to decide what legislation they want to put to the House. I can do it in a PMB, and we can talk about this 3 years from now. It's the government that's going to decide ultimately.
You're a realist.
What we're actually, well, I mean, look, we're on a short timeline, and it's up to the government to actually get this done. So when they decide to do it, that's what we're really going to be considering, and that's where we're going to get into the real details, notwithstanding whatever was in the chief electoral officer's report. I think studying it is good because that will prepare us to have an informed opinion on the proposal of the government. But the real decision making happens once the government has actually tabled legislation and it's gone through a second reading debate in the House. So I'm not too hung up on that. I mean, I think if the language that and I'm not clear on what the sub amendment is and what the amendment is, so I think we just need some guidance for the chair on what the date is. But in principle, if the idea is that we want to, as a committee, report back to the House with something on an interim basis by December 1st, that's fine by me. If we're not determining an end date for the study at this point, then I'm comfortable picking an interim date in December. I just think we should report something back to the House before we rise for Christmas. And as long as we're on track to do that, I'm flexible. I'm hearing from the analysts the challenges of a mid-November date. So I think Mr. Doherty was quite right to say let's push it into December. Whether it's December 1st or December 11th, I'm agnostic about that. I think it's just important we get something on the table before Christmas, and and I don't want to be too restrictive about that. So if we hear good things and we come to conclusions about things that aren't within the scope of the specific recommendations by the chief electoral officer, I would like for those things to be able to be included in the report that we would table prior to Christmas. So I'm just offering that up, and I think with the time remaining, because I know given the IT restraints, it's not easy to just extend a meeting. I think it's important that we get to a decision. So let's have some kind of interim date in December. Let's not put an end date on the study. Let's not restrict the interim report to the specific recommendations of the chief electoral officer, but let's understand that that is a priority for the committee, and we will be addressing those in the interim report. And if somebody can just find the wording for that, let's get it passed and carry on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blakey. I think Mr. Doherty might be our saving grace in this moment. So where we're at is there was an interim report date suggested of November 23rd. That was Dr. Duncan's first amendment. And then a sub-amendment was moved by Mr. Doherty for December 11th. I'm hearing some agreement, at least between the NDP and Mr. Turnbull, on not really being fussed about the date. If it's December 1st, that would be okay with some of members as well. So, Mr. Doherty, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It sounds like we've been able to somehow come to a consensus, but I feel it important to bring this up, that and pardon the partisan comments, but the only people talking about the potential for a snap election really are our Liberal friends on this committee. And so it would beg the question is, what do you know? Because, the concern is here, and our friend Ms. Duncan rightly spoke about our concern for Canadians, going to the polls. But the same could be said that if there was such a concern for, that the government has such a concern in terms of sending Canadians to the polls, well, by-elections were called, and all of a sudden you're trying to get your by-elections done quickly. So where's that same concern in terms of those Canadians that have to go and elect a candidate in those ridings? The only person that seems to be thinking that every time the opposition speaks or opposes or brings forth a motion in the House, that all of a sudden it has to be a confidence vote, is the Prime Minister and the government. And I'll leave it at that. The challenge that we have at this point is that we've got this motion, and the Chief Electoral Officer has expressed some concern as well. And so, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I think we're okay with Mr. Blakey's all right with the amendment that Mr. Turnbull has brought forward, and I'll remove my amendment from the floor, and I'll go with what Mr. Blakey and Mr. Turnbull have come to an agreement with.
So perhaps you can move. I don't know if it's ever been formally moved. It was just discussed. I don't know. Maybe the clerk can help us with that, and maybe if everyone's okay with it, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But maybe, Mr. Doherty, what you could do is withdraw your sub amendment, and resubmit a sub amendment with the date of December 1st.
Madam Chair,
would that be needed, Mr. Clerk, or could we just?
Yeah, I think, Madam Chair, what Mr. Blakey was mentioning was that he was endorsing my sub-amendment to go into December, but did agree with Mr. Turnbull, just as long as we are agreeing that we are going to get to work now, and then have to report back, and whether it's the first week or the week of the 11th. But I think, Mr. Turnbull, you suggested December 1st. Is that correct? And Mr. Blakey, you were in agreement with that? You're okay with that? So then, Madam Chair, I move that a sub-amendment that the committee undertake Mr. Turnbull's motion. We agree to adopt Mr. Turnbull's motion, but we amend the final line that says the committee perhaps the committee prepares a interim report of its findings and report it to the House no later than December 1st of 2020.
Okay, Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Doherty. Could we have a vote on that sub-amendment, please?
Okay. The vote is on Mr. Doherty's sub-amendment. Mr. Algabra.
Yes.
Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Ms. Jessic.
Yes.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Mr. Lakiski.
Yes.
Mr. Tucker.
Yes.
Ms. Vecchio.
Yes.
Mr. Terrien.
Mr. Terrien? Yes.
Yes.
Sub-amendment carried.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, does the sub-amendment obviously make the original amendment null and void then?
No, I mean, strictly speaking, the committee would have to now adopt the amendment as amended. So this would be back to Ms. Duncan's amendment, which has just been amended by Mr. Doherty's sub-amendment.
Just a quick point of order. I'm wondering if we might be able to do that by unanimous consent instead of by roll order vote.
Yes, you could.
Okay. And is anyone opposed to the amended amendment? Okay, perfect. So the official date is December 1st for an interim report. Yes.
It's just the committee would also need to agree to the motion as amended now.
Okay. Is there any opposition to the motion as amended? Okay. So it is carried, and this will be our first study.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Doherty.
I would suggest that, and maybe this can be considered at a later date, but while we are dealing with the motion right now that we've just agreed to undertake, that we do have a final date on it, like perhaps put an end date on it, or do we all agree that we're just going to undertake the study and we'll see where the study takes us, or are we going to commit to an end date?
I think at this time the motion didn't commit to an end date, but I do absolutely think the committee may want to, at a point, put one in so that this doesn't go on forever.
Okay.
And the subcommittee on the agenda could do that or make a recommendation on that after they've got their list of witnesses. After those have been received from each of the parties, I think we would maybe have a better understanding as to how much time we would need for the complete study. But I would propose that we first and foremost hear from the Chief Electoral Officer on Thursday, since he is on standby and is willing to come, and that the committee perhaps decide on a date to submit all witnesses by. So we have the next meeting filled, but next week we would have to decide on at this point. And when would the committee like that deadline to be? So that we can get the ball rolling and get a discussion as to how many witnesses we have. In the past, what we've done is we've grouped them by themes and had panels according to those themes of the study. But of course, you can suggest what those themes are, how you would like them grouped, and me and the clerk will do our best to make sure that we move accordingly. Mr. Blakey.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I think, given the fact that we're trying to get the study up and going quickly, and so we may want to have witnesses for next Tuesday already, but we may not want to have felt that we've, established a final witness list by then, that it might be prudent to have a preliminary witness list submitted by the end of the week so that we can begin to, or even by Thursday, if we understand that we're just submitting a few names to get started, and then we could talk about a deadline for filing a final witness list, but that might at least allow us to get started with filling slots for Tuesday and Thursday next week.
That's a great suggestion, Mr. Blakey. And I think the clerk has something to add to that.
I'll just mention to the committee that the motion that the committee
you're on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Just mention
you're still on mute.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just 1 second. Yeah.
But we can hear him.
I think you're hearing him through my phone. or you're hearing him maybe through the floor audio.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I was just going to make the point that the motion as it's worded that you just adopted does give me some witness material to work with already. So there is reference to the Chief Electoral Officer, to the provincial Chief Electoral Officers, which have had or will be having elections soon, as well as provincial health official or public health officials, and then advocates. So it's really on that fourth point. Maybe suggestions of names, can be provided, to me by the end of this week on that. That would be useful. But at least some of the other ones, that gives me material to get working with in terms of trying to send out invitations.
Sorry, so Mr. Clerk, you're saying public health officials and advocates for those who face barriers? Is that what
Yeah,
you're suggesting?
I'm just looking at the wording of the motion that you adopted. So I talks about Canada's chief electoral officer, II provincial chief electoral officers who have already run elections, and then 3 public health officials. So there are people there that we can get started with. And then in the meantime, any other suggestions of specific witnesses that you have can be provided if that is amenable to the committee by the end of this week. That would be of great assistance.
Okay, so you're okay with by the end saying the end of this week? Are you okay with a Friday deadline? What time would you like it to be?
I mean, would 12 noon be acceptable
Okay.
to everybody?
The
Is
only
the committee
challenge,
okay with Friday 12 noon? Sorry, somebody said there was a challenge, Mr. Doherty.
the only challenge with that is that we have 2 provinces that are undergoing elections right now that their officials would be tied up for at least the next 2 weeks. So that I would maybe perhaps put them in as placeholders, understanding that BC's elections will
Yeah.
be finalized. Well, they're still saying that it could be up to 2 weeks or 3 weeks before everything is counted. I don't know how Saskatchewan's is going to be, but I think as long as the committee is amenable to having those 2 groups and officials from those provinces added into this study, a timeline yet to be, or a date to be determined when they're available. I think that they would provide great insight for this committee. I just don't think that they'll have the capacity to be able to report to the committee within the next couple of weeks.
And this is just a preliminary list, so you can continue. You can have another list that follows, but you can also add them on this list, and we can schedule them out a little bit further when they would have time. They might not even have time to respond. But Mr. Tucker wants to add something.
Yes, coming from the great province of Saskatchewan, that is less than 7 days away from their general or our general election. I think probably the most useful witnesses would be chief electoral officers in New Brunswick, obviously, that just went through election during a pandemic, Saskatchewan currently, and BC. So I think of the very least, to Todd's point, is that we need to hear from these people for sure. And as we know with elections, it just doesn't end. The work in those offices doesn't just end on election day. There's a ton of work afterwards. So a little bit of flexibility to make sure that we get in Saskatchewan, Michael Boda will hopefully attend and take part as a witness would be, I think, very helpful for this report.
Absolutely, and maybe if the committee is willing, we can, work around their schedule at some point, and perhaps try to schedule a meeting at a time that may not be our permanent time. I'd be open to that if all the members are, so we get all of those important witnesses in. I believe Ms. Vecchio has something to say at the end.
Just carrying on with what Corey said, I also think it would be a great opportunity because we're going to be having the chief electoral officer this Thursday, but post-election on Monday, we're going to be having those 2 elections going on there. And I think getting a report or getting, after going through that election day, I think we should really be asking what were some of the hurdles that you didn't even see coming. So on Thursday, we're going to say he's going to share with us everything that he is prepared for, but then we need to see what were the actual results from those hurdles and the different things that he put into place. So I would really like the opportunity to call him back as well as a witness so that we can discuss post-election. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I will make a note of that. That will let him know we want him to come back to report on those by-elections after the fact. So I think we have agreement at this point that by Friday noon we'll submit our preliminary witness suggestions, and then we'll have, obviously there's open opportunity after that point to submit other suggestions, and then the committee can decide at what point if they do want a cutoff date for any new suggestions, because I think Mr. Doherty had mentioned he does want some kind of end in sight or some kind of scope, and we know we could go on forever. Really, it's such an interesting topic. But good work, everyone. Thank you for all your great input that got us to this point. And I look forward to seeing you on Thursday and getting started with this study. So have a good rest of your day. The committee is adjourned.